Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a discussion that we're going to have today about whether Europe should be operating a war economy to support Ukraine. This has all come off the back of the European Commissioner Teri Breton's comments. He's been saying this quite a few times over the last few weeks, and it's completely stuck in my head. I can't get over it. I keep on thinking, I keep on returning to it, and I think other people are as well. What exactly does this war economy mode mean? It's all off the back of some proposals to raise ammunition supplies to try and refill European stocks of ammunition that they've been sending to Ukraine for Ukraine to fight the Russian invasion on their territory. So I've got a few people that I'm going to speak to over this. I've got an economist. What is a war economy? I'm going to speak to some journalists that have been following this intensively in Brussels. And I'm going to speak to the EU spokesperson for Teri Breton, who isn't really able to talk about his comments too much, but she explains a little bit more about exactly what's going on. So first things first. First thing I want to say is my new loft studio that I've done has proven very difficult. The sunlight completely washed out the shot, so I have cardboard boxes all over the windows, which will be solved for the next time. Oh, important to say, if you're watching this show and you enjoy it, please subscribe on YouTube. You can also get notified when we're going live. It's easier for me if that's the way it's done. If you've got any comments, drop them on YouTube as well or on Twitter. We read them as we go through, and we read and respond as we continue. But yeah, if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, that makes my life a lot easier. It's sort of easier if this show lives there. So thank you so much for everyone that's joining and supporting it. I've had some really nice comments about this show over the last couple of weeks, so I'm really happy to keep doing it. I'm really stressed about the cardboard boxes. They may fall on me as we continue. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to bring in Teri Breton. This is what he had to say. He said this at the European Defence and Security Summit recently, which I was actually at. So let's just take a look at his comments first.
12 months. Artillery ammunitions, tanks ammunitions, the commitment to deliver 1 million ammunition for Ukraine within 12 months. Artillery ammunitions, tanks and missiles. European defense industry must now move into a war economy mode. To achieve this, together with High Representative Josep Borrell and the defense minister of the 27 member states, we have defined a 3-point plan. First, continue to release member state stocks by mobilizing €1 billion from the peace facility. Second, purchasing together through joint contracts, again, €1 billion from a peace facility of ammunition. And third, ensuring the industrial ramp-up.
So that's what Breton had to say. He's talking about this war economy mode. I really like war economy mode. Where I grew up, that kind of thing always means sarcastic. She is a horrible person or a nice person. It's always sarcastic. So it was interesting that he said it, and there was quite a lot. He said it a few times, and there was one person, and actually the reason that I kind of thought to do this was because in the European Parliament, an Irish MEP who's often considered kind of a bit of an outlier, and talks kind of, she's considered to have quite extreme views often, or certainly not in the groupthink. She's an Irish MEP, and she made a comment about it. And I was in some WhatsApp group with some other EU people, and they were like, do you know what? She might actually have a point. Her name's Claire Daly. So take a listen to what she said in the Parliament. I'll just bring that up.
The arms industry boardrooms all over Europe. A plan rushed through behind closed doors, no public consultation, no public debate, presented as a fait accompli, just waiting for our rubber stamp. A unilateral declaration by an unelected commissioner that Europe is now a war economy. Not a war on poverty or homelessness or on climate change, but a diktat to the public of Europe that they have to accept another €1 billion being laundered from their pockets into the fat wallets of the global arms industry. The workers in those factories have to suck up the suspension of the Working Time Act, and if they don't, they'll be brandished as traitors or Kremlin agents. And if that wasn't bad enough, it won't be just our arms industries, because our friends in the US and Israel can dip into the pot, flog off bits to their European counterparts who'll do the final assembly, put a stamp and a premium on it, and it's champagne all round. And why wouldn't it be? At €3,000 to €4,000 per shell, and the workers of Europe are expected to pay for 1 million of them. It's absolutely outrageous.
So that was Claire Daly, and I mean it's quite an extreme statement. She's talking quite boldly, but there is a big question to be asked about whether European citizens are willing to pay for this ammunition, and whether it is just sort of being pushed through, and who profits and who gains from that. So what I wanted to do firstly is to bring in Francesco Nicoli, who is Hey, Francesco, who's an economist, a visiting fellow at the Bruegel think tank. Thanks so much for joining me. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, what is a war economy? We've had this comment. What is it? From an economics point of view, what does it mean?
So typically when we think about war economies, we think about the entire economic structure of a country, which starts to focus on the production of those goods and services that are needed for a country to win a total war. And usually we do not have many historical examples of complete war economies, except during the First and Second World War. When we think about a war economy, we think about a modern economy completely focused on a war. And maybe the US in 44, or Germany in 43, 44, maybe France in 1915 or 16 could be examples, but it's rare that an entire economy focuses on the production needed to win a war. And certainly that's not what Breton meant. Breton meant to have some public funding to support Ukraine. It's quite interesting, by the way, you brought in the democratic aspect and democratic legitimacy. We did not talk before about this, but actually that's really my area of expertise. And we recently have data precisely on whether Europeans support joint procurement of ammunition. And the response is generally, actually, yes, they do.
Well, this is it. Is it just if we do it together, it makes it cheaper? And that's kind of what he's saying. Do you think he's just trying to make it a bit more of a sort of extreme push? Is that why he's using that language?
No, I don't think so. Nothing in what we're seeing now at the EU level can be defined as an extreme push. True, we are going to invest 1 billion perhaps in production of ammunition, but that's a pretty low number. When we think about what Ukrainians are doing in order to survive, investing 1 billion in ammunition support really does not sound much. The US have done much more out of their stocks. The only reason why we have to invest now is that for many years, European Union countries have structurally disinvested from anything pertaining defense. So we have to catch up. I think on average, the US has given 1 billion a month to Ukraine in the past years.
Yeah. So a war economy essentially, though, means all different industries going into the defense industry, right? So bakers and everything. That's not suggested. That's not even happening in Ukraine, is it?
No, absolutely not. Not even in Ukraine, this is happening. Not even in Russia, this is happening. But especially is simply not consistent with the way economies work. War economy is something that really pertains, middle 20th century way of thinking about economics. Manufacturing and production of things takes up the large share of economic activities. But in today's economies, services make up the large share of economic activities, intellectual property, knowledge workers, and all these type of activities are simply not helpful anyway. Even if you wanted to gear the entire economy towards a war, services will not help much.
So why is he making these comments then? I mean, it's just to try and kickstart the defense industry.
So I wouldn't like to second guess, why Breton is using this specific wording. I think it's a bit of an euphemism, if you like, trying to push Europe to actually develop or redevelop a weapons industry in order to support our allies. And remember, Ukrainians are in the mess they are, in part because they decided at some point freely of their own will that they wanted to start a European integration path. They're dying because they went in a square with the EU flags, and the minimum we can do is to at least develop an industry to support the struggle.
Yeah. So what do you think though? Like, are we though fine-tuning an economy, a defense industry though? Are we priming it to be much more important economically in the future though? Is that kind of what's happening in Europe right now?
Perhaps not, but it's true that the world where we live nowadays is unfortunately radically different from the world of 2019, for instance. Already the COVID crisis had shown that the West is vulnerable in front of unexpected shocks to the global economy, right? Remember when simultaneously we had China blocked and the Suez Canal stuck, and everybody was freaking out because we were not able to have goods. So in a way, the past few years have brought back the idea that a services only economy is vulnerable in many ways, so that manufacturing needs somehow to have at least a basis near home. And one of the main sectors of manufacturing, which Europe in particular has ignored in the past years, has been defense. And we have ignored it because we were hoping and pushing and working to live in a very peaceful world. Unfortunately, we haven't succeeded. It takes two to make peace. And it somehow is out of our control, the fact that others have chosen a path which is much more confrontational. We have no option but to, respond to that and be prepared.
Can you just give us an example quickly of what a war economy actually looks like compared to a normal economy? Can you just, from an economics point of view, weigh them up again?
Yeah, so again, if we take the ideal war economy, which is, and I will repeat this, not what Breton is talking about, but if we take an ideal war economy, for instance, from the middle 40s or 1917, it means that people will be changing the production lines from manufacturing of automobiles to manufacturing of cars, of tanks or military trucks. It means that instead of producing Coca-Cola cans, we're producing canned food to send to the front. This is the type of ideal, typical war economy we would find in history books. But again, that's not what Breton meant.
Yeah, but that begs the question, why was he asking it then? Which is really, why is he saying this? I have a bit of a theory. He did a tour of a lot of different, I think like 13 or something countries. And he did a tour of all the defense industries and went and met ministers and all of that. And it's a bit of a case of, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. He got all sort of defense industry excited and decided, right, we need a war economy, and started saying it. That's my theory anyway. But Francesco, I really, really appreciate your time today. I know you're super busy and you're running to an airport. So thank you so much for joining the show.
No problem. See you soon.
Yeah, have
Bye-bye.
a great trip. See you soon, matey. Steady. Bye. Cheerio. Bye now. Okay, so really interesting to hear from Francesco about exactly what a war economy kind of means and what it actually says. Now, I think it's important I can bring in, because while that was what Breton was saying, I managed to get hold of a Commission spokesperson to ask exactly what von der Leyen thinks of this, because he has a boss, Thierry Breton. She's never commented publicly on these war economy mode comments. Sorry, I'm full of hay fever today as well. And she said, but they say, like, what's clear is that she supports the new proposals to create the billion rounds for Ukraine and has been promoting it actively. That's the Commission's line. So now I want to bring in two Brussels-based journalists. One is my friend Teri Schultz. Hey, Teri, how you doing?
Doing fine, Jack.
Really good to see you, and who is a reporter at DW and at NPR and a proper expert on defence. It's really cool. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say because you've been travelling around these places as well. And the other is Jorge Liboriero, who's from Euronews. Hey, buddy.
Hello, Jack. Hello.
It's really good to see you guys.
Hey,
Yeah.
Hi, Teri.
It's good to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining the show. I'm going to start with you, Teri. You've just been to Norway, right? Following this. What's going on?
And Estonia, which is also an interesting case. So what I was looking into for DW is not the question so much of whether we should be in a war economy mode, but why they're using that term without taking any of the measures that would actually put you in a wartime economy and looking at what different interpretations are. Like if you're Thierry Breton speaking for the European Commission, which is speaking for all EU states to some extent, why did you not talk about this with everybody before you started using this term? And this is something that hasn't been answered. So I was at the Leonard Medi conference in Estonia, and I asked this in a panel as well as talking to experts individually. And the German ambassador to Poland had a very dry look on his face. You can imagine being the German representative in Poland with the current state of sort of differences over contributions to Ukraine. And he said, this is not a term that will get you far in Germany. Do not use the term war economy. That's not effective. Meanwhile, when you talk to the Baltics, they're like, sure, we're already acting like that. We wouldn't have to change a thing. But, the term in Germany in particular is not welcome. I mean, you say this, you bring up images of Nazi labor, you bring up images of rations, and this is also true. Even go as far as the United States. Are they asking people to plant gardens in their backyard here in Europe because you're not going to have enough to eat? That's what wartime economy conjures up in the minds of citizens. And Breton didn't even think to say, now what I mean by that is,
this is exactly it. And like I said at the beginning, like with the war economy mode, it always sounds kind of sarcastic. Jorge, I'm gonna come to you because you've been following this in Brussels, guys. If I can ask you just to mute your mics when you're not speaking as well, that's really useful for me as well. Sorry, it's just a bit of echo on it. Jorge, I mean, that's it. The Germans are totally not up for it, but the French are well in favor of this as well because it's good for their arms industry.
Of course, this whole conversation about war economy is tied to this other conversation about strategic autonomy that the European Union having for a long time, even before the war started. And for the French, obviously, they're very interested in pushing their own national interest in this case, industrial interest, to reinforce the capacity of the European Union inside its own, in order to make itself more self-reliant compared to the United States. However, the defense industry is also very globalized, so to speak, because we need materials from different countries. We cannot do it by ourselves in Europe. So this is what was shown during this debate about this new million joint procurement initiative. The French wanted to have more of a European-only approach, while other countries saying, okay, let's be realistic, we cannot do everything by ourselves. So in the end, this sort of compromise, usually in the European Union, acknowledging the reality on the ground, obviously being more pragmatic in order to deliver weapons more easily and quickly to Ukraine. Well, this is a work in progress, so we'll see if this 1 million rounds of artillery shells that have been promised to deliver by the end of the year can be met or not.
Yeah, Jorge, just to let you know, there's kind of a weird judder on your video and sound coming through. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I don't know whether it's my my broadcasting software. It's too rudimentary for a fancy studio. I really appreciate it, though. And you're right. But Teri, I mean, there is a... it's such a Brussels comment, isn't it? It's such a thing, but it does change opinions when people start to say these kind of things. Small, in my 10-year experience in Brussels, small nuggets can turn into huge things. They plant the seeds of these ideas and then they grow, right?
Well, it's a Brussels and a Paris comment. And I think that your point earlier about this being very much tied to Breton's tour of, I think it was 15 weapons manufacturers. And he had used the term before he took this tour, but he certainly started using it afterwards. And I think that another Brussels thing is, of course, that you've always got to look at what the French and the Germans are thinking between the two of them. And, there was this debate. Macron did not want to let non-EU weapons manufacturers in on the big new contracts that were coming with the added funding. And I think that he may actually be using it to prod the Germans. Now, some of the most important ammunition manufacturers in particular, but also weapons manufacturers in general, are in Germany. And, when I'm doing my NATO reporting, we're still hearing from weapons manufacturers that they're not getting these contracts for all this talk. They are not getting signed contracts to ramp up their production, which is just incredible if you listen to the politicians. So I think that Breton may also be aiming at governments to say, you guys need to be a lot more worried about this than you are. You need to be taking much more urgent actions than you are. But again, I just find it incredible that he's making these statements without having discussed, obviously, with other governments, whether that's a term that will work for them. He may be shooting himself in the foot, trying to get more weapons, using this term when he has not discussed it with the Germans, when there's no language agreed. And in fact, the Germans are reacting really antagonistically to using this term.
Yeah, this is it. So you and I were both at that European Security and Defence Summit thing. We were both working at it. And I did a panel with an arms maker. And one of the things they said is that if we're going to ramp up production, we can't ramp down. That's what they're saying. They can't bring in a load of staff, make a load of changes to their system, grow loads of weaponry, send it all to Ukraine, and then just stop making it. Jorge, I wonder from your point of view, whether you think that there is a sense in the populations of Europe of exactly what's going on here. Do you think people are aware of this in Spain, where you're from, or, we talked about the Baltic states, but, other countries, Czechia or Slovakia or whatever?
I think Europeans have been for a long time, so they got so used to living in peaceful times. The defense industry has never really registered with them much. Investment in defense is something that it's a common topic of discussion among citizens or even among governments. But I think there's this Ukrainian war has obviously shown that we need more realpolitik mindset, because we need to have this defense industry, both for the short-term needs, which is the Ukraine war right now, and also the long-term needs, because this invasion has changed Europe history forever. So obviously the investment in defense is going to continue after the war is over, even probably overstand, but it's going to continue. And this has been a change in paradigm. As Breton said, he unveiled this 500 billion plan for the industry. So I think there's a realization indeed among citizens, maybe not as big as maybe the Commission would have wanted to, because again, this defense industry, so it's something maybe doesn't is not as pleasant topic of conversation as others. But I have to say, though, this sense of Breton about a war economy, it's super that they took more than 1 year to be issued to the public, because it's true that it's hard to have a war economy in models. But we have also...
Jorge, we're starting to kind of lose what you're saying a little bit, I'm afraid.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It's interesting what you're saying, but it's just starting to get a little bit inaudible and a little bit ununderstandable. I'm sorry, mate. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining the show. We'll have you on again soon, all right? Thanks so much, dude. So Teri, I'll stay with you. The audio was bad for you as well, right?
Yeah, it was.
It's kind of juddering. It's because I'm self-opping the whole show. Sometimes I'm not sure if it's just me and my computer. But when you've followed this defense stuff for ages. Have these companies not been calling for this kind of thing anyway? The Americans have been calling for step up in spending in defense for ages.
They've been calling for other countries to step up their defense spending, but the US, along with all the others, ramped down ammunition. The US is in a slightly better position than some other European countries when it comes to being able to scale up a bit, but nobody did this. Literally no NATO country would have been prepared to provide ammunition or other weapons to Ukraine at the rate that it's needed today. No one. I mean, the US output is also inadequate for Ukraine's needs at the moment. The US and Europe together can't do what Ukraine needs. But going back to the narrative, going back to the subject of this show, if Breton wants citizens to think about a war economy, they just need to do it all differently. That's not something you say in Brussels and then expect people to listen. Do you think they watch the midday? No, nobody has any idea. No, I mean, no citizen has any clue what he's talking about if they even heard him say it. It's just those of us here who pick apart, what we may look for in populations, how we will, extrapolate this story. Those of us who are here are listening to this, but people aren't planting gardens in their backyard expecting food rations in Portugal for, seriously. The threat perception across Europe is vastly different. In Estonia, they are. They're shipping all of their new weaponry to Ukraine. And of course, all their old is already gone. So, I mean, what the European Commission, what Breton could do more, I think, usefully than throw around terms that he has no intention of explaining is go to the countries where the citizens don't yet fully support or understand that it's a threat to Europe if Ukraine loses. I mean, that needs to be done before you throw around terms harking back to World War II, hurting the feelings of your biggest economy and accomplishing nothing in the process. If anything, Germans will recoil from this kind of language. It's completely useless for him to use that term and think that the governments will say, oh, now we have to spend, now that he's saying this. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. That's the thing. Teri, have you got to run or can you hang around for a bit?
You know the answer to that. I'm always behind on something, but you also know it's one of my favorite topics. So
well, just because I did an interview with Sonya Gospodina, who's the spokesperson on this, and I want to play it out, but it's kind of long. I'm going to start playing it.
How long is long?
Like 8 minutes or something.
Oh, I can. Okay, I'll manage 8 minutes.
Okay, and then hang around and we'll listen to her because I'd be quite interested because it's relevant to what you're talking to, whether you have any thoughts on it. So let's play this out. Let's hear from her. Thank you so much for joining this show today. I really appreciate your time. I wonder if we can firstly just to quickly mention this war economy comment that Teri Breton, the commissioner, made. You can't talk about that specifically. You can't explain why he kind of made those comments. Can you tell me why?
So the Commission is currently very much in the support of the defense industry in the European Union to ramp up the production of ammunition and missiles, as we are at the moment at a very exceptional situation. So because of that, the Commissioner has done a defense.
I've got Aurelie Pugnet, who's joining.
Visiting the member states which have the capacity to produce ammunition and missiles. And he's supporting with various measures and efforts the mapping out and the understanding how the Commission can support the European defense industry. So for this purpose, the Commission has put forward a 3-track plan to support member states' air force, armed forces and the Ukraine's armed forces to fight the Russia's aggression, and especially in view of ramping up the production of ammunition and missiles. And yes.
What does it mean that there is simply, taxpayers' money that's going to go to pay for this ammunition? How is the EU sort of thinking about this? How is the Commission working around this? Because we're paying for this ammunition.
The defense industry is an integral part of the industrial policy or the industry sectors in the European Union. And according to the treaties, the Commission can support European industry in its development by coordinating and providing for prosperous measures. So defense industry is part of the mandate that we have, that we should support to develop. And via the industry, it is not only about production of defense equipment, it's about making rural regions, for example, prosper. It's about developing skills and reskilling workforces. It's about making sure that there is more jobs and growth in the European Union. So this is an action that it's fitting into the industrial policy of the European Union, and which will prosper also the citizens that live in the regions where there is defense facilities, defense industry facilities.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think we all totally get it, that in order to supply Ukraine with weapons, weapons need to be created and bought and then given and sold and then resupplied. But I sometimes wonder whether there's a sort of tacit understanding, enough of an understanding of what this actually means. From the Commission's point of view, industry is saying that they can't just ramp up this production as long as the war goes. When signing the contracts for how much ammunition is going to be bought from these arms companies and you know, weapons makers, how long are those contracts looking like?
The measures that the Commission is taking at the moment are temporary, and they're really set up for an emergency situation. So really what we want to do is, because we see that the situation is unprecedented, it's a conflict that hasn't been in Europe for the last decades. So we need to take urgent measures, and that means we need to mobilize finances, we need to mobilize also regulatory environment to support the industry. And the measures, the legal act that the Commission has put at the beginning of this month, the Act on the Support for Ammunition Production in the European Union, is in an emergency and the temporary mode. So we are putting an effort to support the industry to very quickly ramp up the production. And this is with putting on the table money, financial support, but this is also through easing the regulatory environment, and of course providing for support measures such as the priority rated orders to help the companies receive the raw materials or components that they need to urgently produce ammunition. So it's something that really has a short-term, very intense short to mid-term purpose.
How easy will it be to ramp down that kind of production, though? What are there plans in place to sort of work out how to make sure it is only temporary?
We are at the moment mapping out what is the production capacity, and this is something that will be an ongoing exercise. And the focus at the moment, because of the criticality of the situation, is to very quickly increase the production, because we are seeing that the storages of member states are depleting, but we need to support Ukraine with ammunition and missiles. So we need to make sure that very quickly the industry can provide and help with the supply of the ammunitions.
I mean, industry must be delighted about this, to have this, you know, the arms companies must be absolutely over the moon to have a really secure, steady, you know, purchaser in the European Commission. How much are you working with them? How much is the Commission sort of discussing with industry? Because obviously you need to know what they need to do for us. But the question is, you know, is it not a worry that the sort of industry is getting into bed with the politics a little bit?
The Directorate General for Industry and Internal Market is in a constant, I mean, this is at technical level, it's at a constant discussion with the industry, and this is all kinds of industry. I mean, these are the interlocutors, because we cannot conceive policies at European level without listening to the needs and also to the criticism of the industry. And this relates to all policy areas where the Commission is active. It's environment, we are in contact with NGOs, we are in contact with all the various civil society and stakeholders. So this is not an exception that the Commission at technical level, as mentioned, but also at the political level is in contact with the industry, as this is part of our landscape of interlocutors. So this is something which I believe is a given. Then in the context of the defense industry, in order to understand, because this is a novelty, it is something which is unprecedented, that we are supporting to, let's say, such extent the European industry to ramp up production, especially for ammunition and missiles. So for these purposes, Commissioner Breton has debarked on a defense tour. So he visited every member state that has the capacity, existing capacity, to produce ammunition and missiles. And those are 11 plus 2 member states where he went. He visited the facilities, the factories, to identify what are the needs, what are the, let's say, concrete, specific supply or production capacity of those facilities, and to see how the Commission can, with our, let's say, within our mandate, support the development of further production capacity.
Sonya, really interesting. Thank you so much for joining the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Sorry, I'm having some technical disasters today on this show. So that was really interesting from Sonya, though, and I think it was really interesting. I kind of said this before, but when she was talking about the tour that that he kind of went everywhere, and it's true. The commissioner probably has Breton probably does have the best understanding of the defense industry and the capacities right now. He's done that tour. He's seen what we can do, right, Teri?
That's true. But again, just to reflect on a couple of things that she was talking about, she completely avoided your first question, which is, why is he using and this is because nobody has any clue why he's using that term. He knows.
Let me clarify. I'm so glad you picked up on that. So I'd said to this is such a journalistic thing, right? So I'd said to her, she was like, I can't, it's not my place to talk about, I can talk to you about the details of it, and I can explain it to you what's going on. And I was like, great. I really like Sonya. She's like a really great spokesperson. And then
she didn't tell us anything we'll know, Jack.
When I got to the recording, I was like, I have to say, obviously we wanted to talk about the war economy comments. And I was like, I'll lead in with that, and then I'll ask you the question. And I couldn't help myself. Be like, can you say why at least you can't do it? And she couldn't, so she just kind of moved on.
Okay, but let's go back to why I'm here, and that is to talk about, whether we are in a war economy, should be in a war economy, or why people are calling it that. And again, I'm trying not to be opinionated, but on this, I have talked to a lot of people, so I know that I'm speaking for other wiser minds than myself out there, that this is not the time to use that term either. If you are going to need to go into a higher mode, and that could easily be because the war doesn't look anywhere close to being over, what do you have next? If you are going to have to ask people to make some personal sacrifices for this, what's your next step?
It's kind of insulting as well, isn't it? In some sense. It's
okay, so here's the other thing. All this money you're talking about spending on arms, none of that was approved by citizens. This was given out of the EU budget that's already there. So you also didn't involve the average person in approving whether these arms should go to Ukraine or not. And therefore, to then ask them to sacrifice for something you never told them they were doing in the first place. Again, the messaging department is on vacation already, I think, because they haven't, you just find this with the European Union in general. They don't explain things to people, and then they wonder why people don't understand or don't care. I think this is a perfect example. This is a very serious issue, and every European should be paying attention, but this is not the way to make them do it. And individual countries have not, in the case of this joint weapons procurement, this doesn't affect the average person. When you're talking about voting for politicians who support continuing to fund, assistance to Ukraine or not, that's where the average person needs to pay attention, needs to be informed as to what their politicians are doing. This was not voted on by, everyday politicians back in towns, where if you had a wartime economy, people would be feeling it. They're not. Even in the countries like Estonia, which is giving 1% of its GDP incredibly to Ukraine assistance, the average person does not feel the pain of that so directly, and they are fully in support of it. They've given up, I think, all their highway refurbishment to to give assistance to Ukraine. Now, that's a place where you'd be feeling sort of a wartime economy, but that's not what Breton is talking about. I just think there needs to be a connection with the average citizen if you want people to understand what's at stake in Ukraine and why your government is supporting it or not.
Because otherwise, there can be a real shift in political tides and sentiments. That's
especially
the truth
with elections coming up. Especially with elections coming up, I think this is really short-sighted.
Yeah, I really agree. Teri, listen, I know you're busy. You're a proper expert on this stuff, and I really appreciate you joining the show and giving your expertise.
Thank you. Big fun, Jack. Happy to support you. Good. To be on Jack Parrock Live, I can make some time.
Oh, don't you? I love you. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you next week. Take it steady. Okay, so super interesting. And what's interesting, so my experience of Brussels journalism is that some of the best defense and security people, especially correspondents, are women as well. There's amazing. Teri's one of them. She's been like bossing the city for a long time. And another one is Aurelie Pugnet, who has just got a new job at Euractiv. And she's on a trip with a defense company at the moment. And I recorded an interview with her last night, and it was so interesting. So take a listen to what Aurelie was saying. I'll just play it out now. Lewis, she is the Euractiv reporter. You got a new job. That's great. Awesome. Congratulations. On defense and security issues. So we've heard Breton talk about this war economy mode. I just want to get your assessment. You're following this stuff. What's your assessment of this plan to ramp up ammunition, how it's going down among member states across the European Union? I wonder if you can talk to the different countries, and also whether you think there's enough engagement with the citizenry, whether the populations of Europe are kind of aware what's going on.
Yeah, on the last one, I think not. I think, to be quite frank, I think people don't really realize what is going on. But that's to come back to Breton's comments. Like, he says that the defense companies have to get into a war economy mode. And I think it's quite interesting that he says the defense companies have to and not the states, because the thing is about what we need to understand about defense companies is that they get their orders from the states. So, for example, you have to have France or Germany or Sweden, Poland ordering those ammunition, those missiles and everything. So when he talks about getting into a war economy, he really talks about like ramping up production, but that's not something you can do overnight. That's something that you need time for. Like, I was just visiting a factory with Boeing, so the airline producer, and they were talking about how they've been ramping up production for certain equipment that they do, and they say it takes time. Like, it's not something you can do overnight. And if you think about it, like, just such a big company says that, so it's going to be the same for everyone. And it has to do with your suppliers, that they also have to get in line, and you have to hire people to assemble all the projects, and that just takes time. And so war economy is, I think it sounds good. It's like people are like, oh, wow, we're in a war economy. But a war economy also means that the state redirects a lot of money that was assigned for a project in the first place. So it's not really happening yet, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, it's weird. We've heard a little bit already about exactly what a war economy is in this show, and I think it's a really interesting piece of terminology. Let's talk about the member states then, because Germany and France, like, the Germans are balking every time he says that. He said it a few times. The French are kind of in favor of it. They've got quite a few defense companies. I wonder if you can sort of go into that, and whether perhaps the Baltic states are in favor of it.
I mean, everyone is in favor of the plan, because at the end of the day, it's EU money that can be put into industry and help them just ramp up production. That means like building production line. It's just, they're happy to get the extra money in, but that's not like the money that comes from the EU. It has to also be complemented by national money from the states, just national government. So that's going to be the tricky bit, I think, for the industry and for the states as well, because it's one thing to say, oh, look, we have a company that produces ammunition and they would love to produce for Ukraine, but that money, that input is being put into the company for it to actually increase its production and be able to deliver this, like all of these ammunition and missiles for Ukraine, then how long is that going to take? If you think about a smaller company, maybe in Slovakia and a huge company in France, which one is most likely to actually be able to ramp up production? I'm not saying the French company can necessarily do it better than the Slovakian, but it will be a criteria at the end of the day to also put the projects forward. And that's also in the States thinking. It's like they're happy to get the money for their own industry. But if they all see that all the money goes to France and Germany, for example, they might not be as supportive anymore at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, though. It's quite an immediate plan, right? They want to do it within a year. From
Yeah.
what you're hearing, is this feasible?
Well, I mean, talking with the defense industry, they say, look, if you want us to do it, we'll do it. The question is where we're going to do it. Like, for example, Rheinmetall, so the German company, they have a factory in South Africa, and this produces faster and cheaper than what they produce in Germany. So you can make it happen. The question is where and what kind of quality, and does it fit exactly what the Ukrainians want? Because at the end of the day, this plan to ramp up production, it's not just to be in a war economy, like Breton says it. It's at first, it's supposed to help the Ukrainians getting the ammunition and the national nations replenishing their stockpiles. So it's to ramp up production, so it's for a war economy, but on a very short term, and that's not with like 500 million that you can do it. It has to be a long-term plan. Like a war economy, it means that you reallocate budgets between priorities, like you change priorities. It means from education and culture, for example, then that money or that effort is going to be put into the defense industry because you have to produce more, and that's fine. But that's not what we're saying now. So I think politicians on all levels, whether it's at the EU or national level, they do want to push for more production and for, I guess, prepare for a war economy would be maybe would make a bit more sense to maybe that's more right to say that they want to prepare for it. What happens if tomorrow we actually need that kind of production?
Yeah, to actually be at war as well. And what?
Yeah, if there would actually be a war tomorrow against us, like NATO countries, I mean, so not Ukraine, then how can we respond to the demand? I think that's what they're trying really to think about, is how can we prepare if we really do need to ramp up production? Although they do say that we need to ramp it up now. So maybe we are in a war economy, we just haven't realized it yet.
From a company's point of view, Aurelie, you're there with Boeing in the US, and you obviously speak to different companies. They're licking their lips about this. This is amazing for them, right? They're going to earn tons of money. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, there's two sides of it, of the story, because you do have those saying, look, at the end of the day, when you sell weapons, a war is good, right? Because that means you get more demand and more just requests coming through. So
are they being open about this though? Are they like, yeah, this war's good for us?
I mean, that's not something I heard now on my trip, that I can tell you. Like I wouldn't say that Boeing has been like, yay,
we love war.
Absolutely not.
They do.
This is something that you hear like very informally. I mean, if you look at the numbers, like defense companies are doing quite well. So they're quite, I mean, it's a bit cynical, but at the end of the day, if your job is to sell missiles and missiles are needed because you need to attack someone, then, or defend yourself against someone else, then, I mean, it's good for business, isn't it? So I think, yes, there are, I don't know if they're like rubbing their hands and being like, oh my gosh, thank you, the EU, or thank you, Ukraine and Russia, rather. But I think what is,
it's thank you, Russia. That's the reality of it.
That's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think what they look for, what I've gotten as an impression is, or what they've been telling me for a few months now, is ramping up production and getting to a war economy needs to have a bit of a longer perspective, which means it can't just be for tomorrow. Because if today, let's say you want to like you're at a coffee shop and you want to start making more coffee because you've got more demand, but then you need to get the machine to make the coffee. You need to get the people to operate the machine. You need the paper cups to then sell the coffee to the customers. And all of these, they take first a while to arrive, but then once you've got them, you need to make sure they will still be in use. So if by the time I get the machine, you no longer need to ramp up the production of coffee because, well, that's done. Like the line, like the queue of people is just done because they've actually waited for their order more than they would have with that, like with the second machine.
They went down the road and got coffee already. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Or went somewhere else. Exactly. So then you don't need a second machine, and you find yourself this machine that is completely useless. It's an investment that is completely. At the end of the day, it doesn't make sense financially, you know. So what they're wondering is, how can I have a long-term perspective to make sure that when I invest into the ramping up of my production, then it is cost-effective, it's efficient, it just makes sense.
But then when there's loads of ammunition, people want to fire the ammunition. That's the problem there. Just one final comment, just quickly from you. Thierry Breton is kind of a rogue commissioner, right? You're from France. He's sort of bowling around saying whatever he wants. Do you think it's annoying? Well, I mean, I'm trying to get answers about whether von der Leyen is like supporting this war economy position. He said some quite bold things in this period in the Commission.
Yeah.
Sort of gets away with it.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, I don't think we can forget the fact that just he's French. And the French have been
this channel's turning into a bit of a like French hater channel. In my last show,
no,
I said like I normally hate the French Eurovision song. No, yeah, you're French. You can say it.
No, what I mean is the French have been, I think, some of the first. I don't know if they've been the first, but among the first to say that they need their industry to really ramp up production, actually think in like a war economy, like have this mindset. So I think it has probably impacted the way he thinks and like the kind of proposal he makes. But you know, like at the end of the day, a commissioner also talks with like all the ministers. Like when he went on his tour across Europe to visit the factories, and he also met with like the ministers of defense, the minister of foreign affairs. So he's like, his move is also probably like politically supported by the member states, and maybe von der Leyen doesn't agree. I don't know. I haven't asked her. But she's
this
also
all comes to a battle.
So she probably has some idea of how also the industry works and what is expected from the EU. And I'm thinking that if you've been in like how many countries did he visit? I think 13.
Yeah.
It's a lot of countries. So when you've spoken to like 13 defense ministers, 13 foreign affairs ministers, like more than 13 companies, you probably have a good idea of what they expect and what they would like.
Not 13 populations though.
No.
And that is where the big battle is going to come in. I'm convinced of it. There's going to be some uproar about this.
Yeah.
Aurelie, I really, really appreciate it. I know you're super busy over there in the US, so thank you so much for taking time to join the show. See you soon. Take it steady, mate. So that was Aurelie. Really interesting to see what she had to say. This show has turned into a bit of a technical nightmare. I've got my light and the sun coming through. But it was super interesting to hear what she had to say about that idea that the arms companies that she's speaking to and she's on tours with them are just kind of really up for it, right? They're well up for it. And it's going to be a battle, I think, in the parliament, in the among national populations in the EU. My prediction is that this is going to get much bigger. So as far as this show goes, please subscribe on the YouTube channel, and also you can notify yourself when we're going live. That's kind of the easier way of doing it. I'm sort of not like overly promoting this on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. I'm just kind of letting it live. But so the best way, if you're interested in this discussion, if you're interested in hearing different reporters from different publications and different voices and experts and stuff, all coming together in one place, which is what this show is allowing me to do, is basically to speak to loads of people who I know are experts and really amazing journalists and really knowledgeable about different issues, and sort of bring them all together in one place. And that's the intention. So yeah, subscribe on the YouTube channel. That would be awesome, and notify yourself when it's going live. Next week, I'm going to touch on a subject which is broadly kind of ignored in Western media, excuse me, and that's going to be the what's going on in Pakistan and why Europe and the West is not really engaging with this at the moment. It's a really hot topic. If you're interested in that and you've got anything to say on it and you'd like to join the show or you'd like to bring any comments in, then you can follow me at Jack E. Parrock on Insta or Twitter and send me a direct message there. And we can have a discussion. I want to get a really diverse set of voices on that. It's a really complicated issue, the Pakistan issue, but it's also really significant. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that as a foreign policy issue with regards to Europe. So thanks so much to everyone that's joined the show live. If you are following this, if you're watching this later, you can still post the comments. I reply to everything. I read everything. And I talk to everyone else that has been involved in the show if there's a comment directed towards them. So please keep continuing dropping those comments. And thank you so much. Really, really great that people are following and watching the show.